Hi there, thrill seekers. Somebody recently asked me to talk about silence, which is kind of ironic to talk about silence, but you can talk about silence. So let's talk about silence. On a Zen retreat, you are usually asked to maintain silence, but in general, Zen retreats tend to allow what's called functional speech. So that means that if you are assigned to rake the leaves during the work period and you don't know where the rake is, you don't have to go, and try to explain, like try to mime raking and being, confused. You can just say, "Where's the rake?" and the person will say, "There's a rake in the shed," and you're done. What they mean by silence is no conversation, so no chatting with each other. When we did our retreats in Japan, which is the first place I'd done a Zen retreat, this didn't need to be explained in any detail. I don't remember. I do remember some conversation about it at the beginning of the retreats, but it wasn't like we had to kind of, delineate exactly what it meant. Everybody just sort of knew, and maybe it was because it was a common cultural assumption in Japan that a Zen retreat is a place where you're silent, even among gaijin like me, foreigners like me who were not Japanese. We understood this. It was when I came to America that I found that I, as a leader of retreat, had to explain silence, like in great detail sometimes. I remember one of the earliest retreats I did in, let's say, a city in the southern part of the United States, instead of identifying them by name in case any of them were watching. Man, I explained silence at the beginning, and the noise level just kept growing and growing. This was a retreat we did in a cold time of the year, I suppose late fall or something like that. And we were all kind of stuck inside, and just the noise level, it was like a cocktail party in there. And after shushing people a few times, and then, that would last a few minutes, and then it would just rise up again, I just decided to go outside and spend most of my retreat outside, because I was just sick of hearing all that noise. The thing about that is, and this is what I tell people at my retreats, is look, if you want to have a conversation, if you feel like you really, really have to have a conversation with somebody, take it outside, away from the group, because there are people who signed up for this retreat because they wanted to spend the weekend or the week or however long the retreat is in silence, and they don't want you to disturb it. And that usually works. And most people don't even take advantage of the out that I've given them to go speak outside if they want, because you really don't want to do that. One thing about retreats, though, that I discovered in Japan is that if you are going to a retreat to have total silence, it's not going to happen. We had our retreats in Japan in the summers usually, and if you've ever watched, if you're a fan at all of Japanese TV dramas, you can always tell when they have shot a scene outdoors in the summer, because there's this deafening noise. Well, maybe not deafening, but there's always the noise of cicadas in the background. And I don't know why cicadas are so much more prevalent in Japan than in other countries, but they're really prevalent, and all summer long you're hearing cicadas. And I remember one year, you hear cicadas every year, but I remember one year must have been like one of those cycles where they really come out, it's every 17 years or something like that. And doing this retreat, the noise level that the cicadas created was, and I'm not exaggerating, comparable to what you'd hear if you were doing a retreat and next door was a pachinko parlor, or in Western terms, a video game arcade. There was one cicada in particular that I remember that it kept sounding like it was going hyper, 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 and then they'd all join in, and they do this thing where they get in sync with each other, and then the noise would get even louder. And I wrote a song about it, not a lyrical song, an instrumental, and in it I used the guitars to try to reproduce the sound of the cicadas and getting them in sync, and the time when they would get in sync with each other and get louder and louder and louder. And this is the song that you're hearing right now in the background, that I recorded after finishing a retreat where the cicadas were really, really loud and trying to get the sense of it. And I swear, this is what it sounded like, except that there weren't basses and drums in the background. But the guitar that's on top of that, it sounds pretty much, I think I got the cicada sound about as close as you can get on a guitar. The only place I've ever experienced really total silence was once I was asked to do some public appearances or maybe lead a retreat in, I believe it was Arizona, but it might have been New Mexico, but I think it was Arizona. And the folks there took me to this, not a mountain, but more of a plateau or something like that, somewhere up high, and it was really, really hot. This was in the summer, so it was the height of the heat. And I remember getting out of the car, and there weren't even insect noises. There was no wind noise. The city was too far away, so you couldn't hear that noise. And it was really utter silence. The only noise you could hear was the sound of footsteps on the gravel and stuff. You could hear that. But everything else was totally silent. That was really interesting. Now, one of the things about silence is that if you say the word silence, then immediately, because of the way words act in our minds, and Zen has a lot to say about this, you contrast that with noise. So it's silence versus noise. And when we're working with silence in Zen, we are trying to get away from that dichotomy which contrasts silence with noise. So there is always silence. Even when there is noise on top of it, the silence still exists as a kind of bedrock. This is kind of similar to the idea of form and emptiness. So, in a sense, form is emptiness, emptiness is form could also be translated as silence is noise, noise is silence. I guess you'd want to reverse it. Form is that. So noise is silence, silence is noise. Now, but silence referring to emptiness and noise referring to form. So, philosophically speaking, the silence is the silence that underlies everything. So, when you are sitting zazen, often what's going on in your head is anything but silence. There's all sorts of chatter and talk, and you can hear Ziggy kind of helping me illustrate that, illustrate what it might sound like during a meditation period in your head, with a lot of chatter and stuff going on. And you can feel like you want to try to force it to disappear or force it to stop or contrast it with the silence that you would like to have in your mind but don't, and then get kind of frustrated because of the friction between what you want and what is actually there. The way I would suggest dealing with that is to notice that there is silence still there. Even though there is a lot of stuff going on in your mind and a lot of chatter and things, there is a silence that underlies that. And what Dogen calls what I'm trying to describe is, he says, turn the light around and shine it inward. So when you shine the light inward, when you actually start paying attention to where that noise comes from, or that head, noise in your head, the chatter and all that stuff comes from, you'll find it comes from that background of silence, and the silence is always there. So you don't want to try to contrast noise with silence and then try to establish silence instead of noise. Ultimately, everything is silent. Well, see, you can still hear the traffic, can't you? But everything is silent. There is the silence that underpins the entirety of the universe, the emptiness that underpins the entirety of the universe. One thing I did find in my practice that might be useful to talk about is that if you practice long enough, okay, let me not say you, when I had practiced long enough, when I'd done Zazen long enough, there came to be periods where I would notice the silence more. I remember in particular one time walking home from work at Tsuburaya Productions through the wilds of Setagaya-ku in Japan, the area where the company was, and just noticing that no thoughts had occurred to me for 10 minutes or something. I didn't know. I didn't put a timer on it, but I was just walking along and went, geez, I haven't thought of anything for a while. And that was because I'd done the practice of noticing the silence long enough that I was no longer, the image I always give you is poking my brain. So whenever the brain becomes a little silent, I think what we habitually do is we like poke it. We like go, come on, give me a thought, and we'll kind of try to generate a thought out of the silence. Well, I'd given up the habit of doing that. The other metaphor that I used, which came up in one of my Moldy Oldie or Friday flashback videos, is the image of turning a bunch of bicycles upside down. This is an idea I had during one of my talks, and I started using it for a while, but then I thought it's kind of weird, so I don't know if this image really works. But the image I had is if you had like 10 bicycles and you had a room that fit 10 bicycles and you just turned them all upside down and started spinning the wheels. And every time one of the wheels stopped spinning, you go over there and spin it again, and then you're looking around, okay, that one's not spinning, and then spin that one again, and then you try to keep them constantly spinning. What we don't realize, I think, or what I didn't realize for much of my life, was how I was deliberately making this happen. That I thought it was happening automatically because it was so habitual. It seemed to be automatic, but it wasn't really automatic. It's just some habit that I have. And if you leave it alone, if I leave it alone, if I stop deliberately generating thoughts, they lose energy. After a while, those bicycle wheels just stop spinning around so much, and there's nothing much there to make them spin anymore. And they can kind of gradually settle down. And that's what we do, and the silence of a Zazen retreat helps that. Oh, here's another thing about Zazen retreats that I forgot to say at the beginning. There are different levels of silence that are expected at certain Zen retreats. And as I told you, my default is based on what I experienced in Japan. I would say only functional talking, and if you've got to talk, you take it outside. And like I said, most people don't even take it outside. They just decide not to talk. Other places take that further and say that a way of keeping up the silence even during nonverbal communications is to avoid eye contact. So they ask you to avoid eye contact. And I had done, God, I don't know how many retreats in Japan and a few in America before I ever encountered this. And then I asked the people, like, is this normal? And then I heard, oh, no, everybody does this. And I'm like, well, I don't know if everybody does it, but apparently it's pretty common to ask people not to make eye contact. Now, when I lead a retreat, I don't usually make that a rule, but sometimes when I'm doing the initial, explaining what the retreat is to the people, I will mention it. Because at the retreats where that was a requirement and I did it, I found that was kind of useful, but it also contributes to the sort of almost solipsistic, introversion thing that you can get into. And to some people, retreats are all about total introversion, getting into yourself, but I don't think that is the purpose of the retreat. The purpose of the retreat does have to do with fellowships. And again, here's another thing I forgot to say at the beginning. Some people will complain about the silence. I often get this from people who have not done a retreat before. They'll start complaining, like, we didn't get to know each other. And yeah, okay, you don't get to chat and converse with each other at the retreats, but I think you get to know each other without talking, and if you give it a chance, you'll find that a lot of communication goes on in the silence, even without deliberately, chatting with folks. And the other thing I do at retreats is I always end the noble silence maybe an hour or two before the retreat actually ends. So we'll have meals at the retreat, and I'll say, well, for the final meal of the retreat, we'll just break the rule of silence and people can chat with each other. And I've noticed other retreats do this. I came up with it on my own, but when I went to Germany, I found out that's what they do at Benediktushof, and I think there are other places that also do that. So there you go. That's a talk about silence. And if you want to help me talk more about silence, or if you want to shut me up, you can send a donation by going to the URL you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. patreon.com/donate. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my only way of making a living, and I really appreciate your donations. But as always, this is offered for free, so you don't gotta donate if you don't want to donate. We will see you again. There's some people already talking around the house, so that's probably a good place to cut it. Have a good time all the time. See you later. Bye.
Ziggy, what do you think about silence? Do you think silently looking through the window is going to get somebody to come out and give you a treat? I think you might have to bark. Oh, maybe somebody's coming. All right, we'll leave you to it. See you later. Bye. Bye, Ziggy.